Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS Legal Hotline lawyer. This video looks at a question that arises with the use of the Form 21 revised August 24. So if you're using the Form 21, revision date August 24, paragraph 17 allows you to, it provides two blanks. In the first blank, you're required to identify the amount of compensation, if any, that seller offered to buyer broker. And in the second provision, you're required to identify the amount of compensation that seller will actually pay buyer broker at closing. And then behind that second blank, there's a checkbox that says Addendum for buyer credit. When would you need to mark the box Addendum for buyer credit? In a scenario where seller has offered more compensation than buyer broker will be paid at closing, there will be an overage amount. Let's say, for example, that seller offered buyer broker as part of their listing, they offered buyer 10 chocolate truffles, and that amount is identified in paragraph 17A, the first blank, but buyer broker is entitled to take only 5 chocolate truffles. And so in the second blank of paragraph 17, the buyer broker will have written in 5 chocolate truffles. Now there's an extra 5 chocolate truffles on the table because seller offered 10, buyer's only using 5 to pay buyer broker. What about the other 5? That checkbox at the end of paragraph 17 is the checkbox that you could mark in that scenario, Addendum for buyer credit. If you mark that box, then you're going to go to Form 41C. Now, if you're familiar with the old Form 41C, it has been greatly revised. Form 41C now covers only one scenario, and that is a scenario where seller has offered more compensation than buyer broker will take at closing. And Form 41C creates an outcome where, if agreed, seller will be obligated to credit to buyer at closing whatever the difference is between paragraph 17A and 17B on Form 21. That is one way of addressing the overage. It is not the only way. Some buyer brokers will use that methodology, but some buyer brokers will not. And they will instead say, my buyer needs the seller or would like for the seller to pay 5 chocolate truffles worth of the buyer's closing costs. So I want to use, since Form 22A is in the transaction anyway, they might say, I'm going to go to paragraph 3, the loan cost provision. And in that paragraph, I'm going to write 5 chocolate truffles. Great. If seller agrees, seller will pay 5 chocolate truffles towards buyer's closing costs. Here's what I want you to learn from this video. You can't do both. Unless you really intend for seller to pay 5 chocolate truffles based on Form 22A and another 5 chocolate truffles based on Form 41C. If all that you have to play with is 5 chocolate truffles, and you account for those 5 chocolate truffles on either form, then you would not have both of those provisions in your purchase and sale agreement. Because if you mark the box, Addendum for buyer credit, and you add a Form 41C, then based on the math, seller is going to owe buyer 5 chocolate truffles as a credit to buyer at closing. And if you, in that same transaction, also add a Form 22A and you mark paragraph 3, and you identify that seller will pay 5 chocolate truffles towards buyer's closing costs, seller now, if seller agrees, seller owes 10 chocolate truffles to buyer at closing. Listing brokers, you must understand the operation of this form. I guarantee buyer brokers are making mistakes with respect to this issue. And listing broker, it is up to you to safeguard your seller's interest in the transaction. to understand the forms well enough to know that if there's really one amount at issue and that amount is charged to seller in both Form 22A and Form 41C, then seller is paying twice what they intended to pay. In that scenario, seller would want to counter, most likely, seller would want to counter buyer's offer to eliminate either Form 41C or the third paragraph provision of Form 22A. If you have questions on this topic or any other, please ask me a question by visiting warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.